The neighborhood of Willow Creek was known for its pristine lawns, white fences, and perfectly trimmed hedges. On the surface, it looked like a suburban dream: quiet streets, friendly neighbors, and neat houses that all seemed pulled from a magazine cover. But beneath that peaceful veneer lurked something darker. The HOA, a homeowners association with too much power and far too much time on its hands. When Mark Dalton moved into Willow Creek, he was just looking for peace. He was a successful small business owner, someone who'd worked hard to earn his comfort. The neighborhood's glossy brochure promised tranquility and community values, and at first, it seemed like the perfect place to settle down. He had no idea what kind of nightmare he was walking into. It all started with a letter, a small, neatly folded envelope tucked under his front door one morning. Inside was a notice: violation number 1127, trash cans visible from street, fine, $50. Mark read it twice, confused. His trash cans were tucked neatly beside the garage, exactly where the previous owner had kept them for years. It seemed like a mistake. But when he called the HOA office, they told him bluntly that rules are rules. He paid the fine, thinking it was a one-time issue. It wasn't. A week later, another notice arrived. Violation number 1153, trash cans out too early. Then another, violation number 1184, trash cans out too late. It became almost comical. Every time he thought he'd done things by the book, a new rule appeared out of nowhere. He noticed how other houses had their bins in the same spot as his, yet no one else seemed to get fined. That's when he realized this wasn't about trash cans. It was about control. The HOA president, a sharp-tongued woman named Linda Patterson, seemed to take personal delight in policing the neighborhood. She was the self-proclaimed guardian of Willow Creek standards, and she had built her little kingdom on enforcing meaningless rules. Mark noticed her peering through her window whenever he rolled out his trash bins, clipboard in hand, ready to pounce on any excuse for another fine. First, Mark tried to reason with her through polite emails and board meeting attendance. But every attempt was shut down by condescending smiles and vague citations of community bylaws. One day, he returned home from work to find a bold red envelope taped to his front door. Inside was a notice that stunned him: repeated violations, total fine, $500. The offense: leaving his trash cans visible for more than 2 hours after collection day, something that half the neighborhood did regularly. That was the moment something inside Mark shifted. The frustration, the helplessness, the sheer pettiness. It all boiled over into something else: determination. He wasn't going to keep feeding money to an organization that treated homeowners like tenants in their own property. If the HOA wanted to play games, then he was going to play to win. Over the next few weeks, Mark began to do his research. He read the HOA's bylaws line by line, uncovering just how much power the board had, and how much of it was based on apathy. Most residents didn't even attend meetings or vote in board elections. The HOA operated unchecked because nobody cared enough to challenge it. But Mark cared now. He attended the next board meeting. It was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room with beige walls, folding chairs, and a faint smell of stale coffee. About 15 people were there, most of them regulars, chatting idly as Linda called the meeting to order. When Mark raised his concerns about the selective enforcement of rules, she brushed him off, claiming that some homeowners require closer supervision. That phrase stuck in his head: closer supervision. It wasn't about order. It was about power. He left that night with a plan forming in the back of his mind. He learned that the HOA's annual election for board members was coming up in 3 months. Any homeowner in good standing could run for a seat, and if they won enough support, they could influence everything from fines to policy enforcement. He'd spent his life building companies, managing teams, and outsmarting competitors. Running against a few retirees with clipboards didn't scare him. Over the next month, Mark quietly began talking to neighbors. He learned that he wasn't alone. Others had been fined for ridiculous infractions: a flower pot the wrong color, a garden hose visible from the street, or kids' bikes left on driveways. Many were tired of it but didn't think they could change anything. Mark knew better. He explained how HOA elections worked and how easy it would be to vote out the current board if enough people cared. That he started small, hosting casual backyard barbecues, inviting neighbors to vent their frustrations. He listened more than he spoke, slowly building trust. He never directly mentioned running for the board, but the idea was already planting itself in people's minds. By the second barbecue, someone joked that he should be HOA president, and everyone laughed, but they also nodded. Meanwhile, the fines kept coming. Linda and her board seemed to sense that Mark was becoming a problem. They cited him for overgrown grass when his lawn was trimmed perfectly. They claimed his mailbox was not regulation height. Every letter was another spark thrown onto the fire. Mark stopped paying attention to the petty fines. He knew what his endgame was now. Instead, he quietly gathered documentation, photos, timestamps, evidence of selective enforcement. He even started compiling stories from neighbors who had been harassed or fined without cause. By the time election season rolled around, he had a full binder of proof and a community that was starting to rally behind him. Then came the election announcement. The HOA would hold its annual meeting in the clubhouse next month. 3 board seats were up for grabs, including Linda's. Mark filled out the nomination form and dropped it off in person. The look on Linda's face when she saw his name was priceless. A mix of disbelief and fury. Word spread quickly around the neighborhood. The man who had been fined over trash cans was now running for the board. Neighbors who had once avoided HOA meetings started marking their calendars. For the first time in years, people cared. Something was shifting in Willow Creek. Mark knew it wouldn't be easy. The HOA had a history of manipulating votes, discouraging attendance, and burying notices in fine print. But he also knew something else. People were tired of being controlled. They wanted fairness, not fear. The night before the election, Mark stood in his driveway, looking at those same trash cans that had started it all. He smiled. What began as a petty $500 fine had turned into something much bigger, a chance to take back control of his own community. And as the sun set over the perfectly trimmed hedges of Willow Creek, Mark knew that tomorrow would be the start of something that would change everything. The morning of the HOA election dawned bright and deceptively peaceful. Birds chirped, sprinklers hissed across manicured lawns, and neighbors waved politely as they left for work. But beneath the calm surface of Willow Creek, tension brewed like a storm waiting to break. For years, the HOA board had operated unopposed. A circle of self-satisfied power wielders led by Linda Patterson, the reigning president. They controlled everything. Which colors houses could be painted, what types of flowers were allowed, even how long garage doors could stay open. Most residents grumbled in private but never acted. Today, that was about to change. Mark Dalton woke up early, his mind already racing. His plan was simple but precise. He wasn't just running for the board. He was running to expose the corruption at its core. Over the past month, he'd built quiet but powerful momentum among his neighbors. Flyers had gone out, not flashy ones, just straightforward messages. Vote for change. Vote for fairness. Vote Mark Dalton. He had spent weeks listening to stories. A grandmother fined for leaving a decorative wreath off-season. A single mom cited for a small garden gnome. A veteran threatened with eviction over a flagpole. The HOA's abuse of power had gone unchecked for too long, and now the people had someone willing to fight for them. The election was scheduled for 6 p.m. at the community clubhouse. By late afternoon, the parking lot was already filling up. More cars than anyone could remember seeing at an HOA event. Normally, a handful of board homeowners attended while the board quietly re-elected themselves. But tonight, the community had come alive. Families brought chairs, couples came holding hands, and residents whispered excitedly about what might happen. Inside, Linda Patterson stood near the podium, dressed in her usual navy blazer and stiff smile. Her allies, Harold from the Compliance Committee and Nancy from the Landscaping Board, flanked her like guards. They whispered among themselves, clearly irritated by the unexpected turnout. They had underestimated how deeply Mark's message had spread. When Mark entered, conversations paused. Heads turned. He walked in confidently, a calm presence amid the tension. He didn't bring notes or a speech. He didn't need to. His preparation wasn't in rehearsed words. It was in the countless hours of listening and understanding what his neighbors had endured. The meeting began with the usual formalities. Minutes read aloud, finances summarized, and new rule proposals discussed. It was a tactic to drain energy before the real event. But the residents were restless. They were here for one reason: the election. Finally, Linda cleared her throat, her voice echoing through the room. "We'll now proceed with the nominations for board members," she said, her smile tight. "We have 3 open positions and 4 candidates. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to speak." Mark was last to speak, deliberately placed at the end, as if to minimize his impact. The first candidates, all existing board members, droned on about community values and maintaining neighborhood standards. Their speeches were empty and scripted. When it was finally Mark's turn, the air shifted. He stood up, scanning the crowd. Faces he now recognized. People he'd shared conversations with. Neighbors who were tired of being bullied. He spoke not like a politician, but like a neighbor. He talked about fairness, about how homeowners had become afraid to live freely in their own homes. He reminded everyone of the endless fines, the lack of transparency, and the intimidation tactics. He didn't shout or accuse. He told the truth with calm conviction. Then he did something no one expected. He pulled out a binder thick, well-organized, and labeled. Inside were photographs, letters, and screenshots, proof of selective enforcement, evidence that certain board members had ignored violations for friends while targeting others. The room fell silent. Mark explained how fines were inconsistently applied, how rule changes were made without notice, and how residents had been denied appeals. The crowd murmured, then grew louder. Some were shocked. Others vindicated. Linda tried to interrupt, claiming he was misrepresenting the facts. But this time, the crowd didn't let her silence him. For the first time in years, the homeowners had found their voice. When voting began, the energy in the room was electric. Ballots were distributed, pens scratched paper, and whispers filled the air. Linda's confident smirk was gone, replaced by tight-lipped anxiety as the votes were counted. The board tried to maintain control, but the numbers spoke for themselves. The first seat went to a retired teacher who had supported Mark's campaign. The second went to a longtime resident tired of Linda's leadership. And then came the third, the presidency seat. By a majority vote, the treasurer announced, his voice trembling, "The new HOA president is Mark Dalton." For a moment, the room was silent, frozen in disbelief. Then, like a dam breaking, applause erupted. Neighbors clapped, cheered, even laughed. Linda sat stiffly, pale and stunned, as if her entire empire had just crumbled before her eyes. Mark didn't gloat. He simply nodded, thanking the crowd and promising change. He knew this was only the beginning. Winning the election was one thing, reforming an entire system was another. The HOA's rules were tangled in bureaucracy, and Linda's loyalists still held influence. Over the next few weeks, Mark began the cleanup. He started with transparency, opening the books, publishing meeting notes, and inviting homeowners to voice concerns. For the first time, people actually showed up to meetings willingly. He found hidden expenses, unnecessary landscaping contracts tied to board members' relatives, inflated fees, and unapproved spending. Every discovery made the old regime look worse, and every revelation brought the community closer together. But power doesn't die quietly. Linda wasn't done. Though she was no longer president, she still had friends on the board, and she began working behind the scenes to undermine Mark's reforms. Anonymous complaints began to appear in Mark's mailbox. Rumors spread that he was corrupt, that he wanted to destroy the neighborhood. Then came the final blow, a letter from the HOA's lawyer, claiming that Mark's presidency was under review due to improper campaigning. It was Linda's last attempt to reclaim control. Mark wasn't surprised. He had expected resistance. But what she didn't realize was that he had planned for this too. He had been documenting every step, every meeting, every vote. As he read the letter, a calm smile spread across his face. The HOA had played their final card, and he was holding the entire deck. By the time the letter arrived, Mark had already anticipated it. The HOA's lawyer, clearly still under Linda's influence, accused him of violating election procedures, a desperate claim designed to trigger a recall vote. But Mark wasn't rattled. He'd spent too many years running successful companies to be shaken by paperwork and petty politics. If they wanted to challenge him, he would use the very rules they'd built against them. He read through the letter calmly, then opened his files. Every step of the election had been documented. Every email, every notice, every recorded meeting. The HOA's bylaws were crystal clear. Nothing had been violated. The board could threaten him, but they couldn't touch him. Still, he saw an opportunity in their desperation. They wanted a fight, but he intended to deliver something far worse. A lesson. His first move as president had been transparency, but now it was accountability. Over the following weeks, Mark initiated a full audit of the HOA's financial records. What he uncovered shocked even him. Thousands of dollars in consulting fees paid to companies that didn't exist. Landscaping contracts billed at triple the standard rate. And the biggest surprise of all, multiple payments made to a small cleaning service registered under the name Patterson Property Maintenance, Linda's company. The evidence was undeniable. Linda had been funneling HOA funds into her own pocket for years under the guise of maintenance expenses. It was embezzlement, hidden in plain sight. Mark didn't rush to expose her. Instead, he meticulously built the case, cross-referencing invoices, bank statements, and meeting notes. He even had a CPA verify every irregularity. He wanted this to be ironclad. When it came time to strike, there would be no escape route, no denial possible. In the meantime, the community continued to change. For the first time, homeowners felt free to breathe. The new board, composed of residents Mark had encouraged to run, abolished arbitrary fines and simplified the rules. Trash cans could stay out a few extra hours, paint colors expanded beyond the dull beige palette, and backyard projects no longer required 3 layers of approval. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over Willow Creek began to lift. Neighbors started smiling again. Kids rode their bikes without fear of noise complaints. The community park, once neglected due to misallocated funds, was restored with volunteers' help. It wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was a community again. And yet Linda remained, bitter, humiliated, and vengeful. Though stripped of her title, she attended every open meeting, sitting in the back, glaring like a hawk. She'd interrupt discussions, nitpick wording, and file complaint after complaint. It was as if she couldn't live without control. Mark didn't take the bait. He let her talk, let her seethe, let her feel invisible, because he knew her reckoning was coming. When the audit was complete, Mark called a special meeting, open to all residents. The turnout was massive. Word had spread that something big was about to happen. The clubhouse was filled to capacity. Even the standing areas overflowed. Linda sat near the back, her arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Mark stepped to the podium, holding a folder thick with papers. His tone was calm, professional, but there was an unmistakable edge to his words. He began by summarizing the purpose of the audit, to ensure financial integrity and rebuild trust in the HOA. Then he projected the findings onto the screen. Line by line, he walked everyone through the numbers. When he revealed the payments to Patterson Property Maintenance, the room went silent. Every head turned toward Linda, her face drained of color. She stammered something about clerical errors and vendor confusion, but the evidence spoke louder than words. Mark displayed the business registration, her name, her signature, her address. The silence turned into murmurs, then outrage. Homeowners who had been fined over lawn ornaments and mailbox colors now realized that their money had funded Linda's greed. Mark didn't yell. He didn't gloat. He simply stated that the HOA had filed a formal complaint with the county for financial misconduct and would pursue reimbursement of all stolen funds. Then, in a quiet but firm voice, he announced that Linda Patterson was permanently banned from holding any HOA position or committee seat. Effective immediately. It was over. The meeting ended with applause, not the loud, cheering kind, but the heartfelt, relieved kind that comes from finally being free. People shook Mark's hand, thanked him, and for the first time in years, left a meeting smiling. Linda stormed out halfway through, muttering threats under her breath, but everyone knew it was finished. The next week, a moving truck appeared outside her house. She was gone before anyone could say goodbye. In the following months, Willow Creek became the neighborhood it was always meant to be. Homeowners took pride in their properties again, not because they feared punishment, but because they loved where they lived. Barbecues became regular events, block parties returned, and even small community projects flourished. The once feared HOA now existed to help residents instead of control them. Mark stayed on as president for one term, enough to rebuild the association and ensure that new leadership would carry on the fair practices he'd established. When he finally stepped down, the HOA's finances were balanced, transparency was permanent policy, and the residents had full access to all decisions. One evening, long after he'd left office, Mark stood outside his home, the same one that had once been the center of all his frustration. The trash cans sat neatly by the driveway, visible from the street. He smiled at the memory of that first ridiculous fine, the spark that had ignited everything. The truth was, if not for those trash cans, he never would have discovered how broken the system was. Sometimes, he thought, change doesn't begin with big moments. It begins with something small, something annoying, something that forces you to take a stand. As the sun set over the quiet, peaceful neighborhood, Mark rolled his bins to the curb. No more red envelopes, no more threats, just freedom, fairness, and a community that finally belonged to the people again. What started as a $500 fine ended as the ultimate revenge. Not through anger or destruction, but through justice, leadership, and the courage to fight back. And in Willow Creek, that story would be told for years to come.